You're listening to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, episode number 37. Today I speak with author, coach, speaker, and mentor Whitnie Wiley on proving God is by loving, serving, and giving. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Cultivate What Matters, for their donation of a planning guide and bundle. You can start fresh in 2021, clear away distractions, grow new habits and self-life-giving routines, follow through on what matters most. Achieve your goals, no perfection required. Welcome to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, where we gain inspiration and motivation from others who share their touching stories of renewing hope and discovering purpose in any circumstance. I'm your host, Christina Reisinger, and today we will be encouraged by another tremendously inspirational topic that will embolden you to release fear, begin taking small steps forward, and move into your God-given purpose to live and serve in this life. Join me for today's story. Hey, Whitnie, and welcome to Faith Breathed Hope. How are you today?
I'm awesome. How are you today?
I am so good, and I am also so glad that you are here with us today. So I would love to have you just share a little interesting fact about yourself with the audience.
Ordinarily, I would share an interesting fact about myself, but since I just mentioned it and you said, oh, you can mention that, I'm going to mention that. I grew up as a city girl, but always had a hankering for something else. And a few years ago, my mother moved to a farm. And so right now I'm down on the farm, I'm visiting with her. And so there are cows in the background. Those are not the cows that are on the farm. It's actually an orchard. They grow cherries, walnuts. There are a couple of olive trees and some other things, but it's sort of out in the middle of nowhere. It's very peaceful. And I love it here. So anytime I get a chance to come and visit, I bring my city slicker self. It reminds me of Green Acres, right? Green Acres.
Oh, I love it. You know what's so funny is years ago, I would have thought that just that country stuff would just not be cool at all. And now I'm almost craving getting to, like, what you just described sounds like a dream. It absolutely.
Absolutely. You know, a couple of years ago, I tried to convince my husband to move to a more rural situation. And the first time I took him where I was thinking, he was like, no, this isn't happening. I'm like, why not? He's like, there are no people here. I'm like, that's the whole point. There are no people, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
I bet for a writer that, so Whitnie is a writer. And so I bet for a writer that is something that is just a dream, to go out there and write. I would love.
Absolutely. You know, my dream is to write on the coast of Hawaii. So there's a piece of Hawaii on the big island, and just to have a place that I can look out in every day, right with the ocean waves. That's the dream.
Oh, yeah.
That's the dream.
Oh, yes. Hawaii is one of my absolute favorite places. And I am also a writer, and not as established as you, but, that's a whole nother conversation. We could just talk forever. But today we are here to talk about proving who God is. And that is by loving, serving, and giving. So the first thing I have everybody do here, other than tell a little interesting fact about themselves so the audience can get to know them, is to share their story. And your story is what got you into writing, correct? You started you out in your writing. And so, I have a similar journey. And so when I read about Whitnie, I said, I need to have you on Faith Breathed Hope, because that's all about what we talk about. So go ahead and share about where you're at, and how you got there.
Okay. So, I am married now, but I was married before and it didn't work out. And we ended up divorced. And at the time, I had a son. We had a son together at the time I was divorced. And So when I left that situation, my focus was about earning a living, right? Being able to take care of my son and I. And so I went back to school. I went to law school, and that was its own story. But after I finished law school, I had moved to Sacramento, California, which is the capital of the state of California. And I had a job as a lobbyist and a lawyer. And but I was not feeling happy in my life. I loved being married. I have always felt like I was made for marriage and motherhood. And so when that didn't work out, I was a little lost, honestly. And while it seems a little silly how focused on that I was like, I was overboard with the being unhappy because I was single. And at that point, I wasn't walking with the Lord. So I was I was doing, I had behaviors that were destructive and not at all in alignment with who I felt I was. But I was, like I said, I was lost. And so I started doing, I wanted peace in my life, and I wanted peace internally, and I didn't know exactly where to find it. I knew of God. I would say that I believed in God, but I didn't know God, right? And so it was academic, and I was very academic, very analytical, logical, not at all living out of my heart or my spirit at that time. And I had this experience. I was out running one morning, and I was like crying. My life is like really screwed up, and I can't get a man, and what's wrong with me, and tell me what's wrong with me so I can fix it, help me fix it. And I had some point where I stopped running, and I remember like being bent over, like that ugly cry that you have, right? Just ugly and snotty and everything. And I was like boo-hoo crying. And I heard God, as clearly as you and I are talking right now, say, try me. You've never tried me. And there was just this calm that came over my spirit in that moment. And I don't know how long I was there in the street. I could have picked up and moved on immediately. I could have been there for a while. I don't know. But at some point, I continued with my run. And I was like, I knew that my life had changed. Now, I sort of thought that it was about shutting me up about the man. But in looking at it in hindsight, what I know is that my walk began there to prepare me for what was going to be the darkest time of my life. And about 2 years later, my son was struggling. At that point, he was 17. And we'd had some back and forth issues with his father and custody issues and whatnot. And my son was expelled from the school in the school district that he was at, just struggling, having all kinds of trouble. And so I enrolled him in an online program, a private school, so that he could finish his education and we could sort of move on to the next phase of his life. And he finished school, and we prepared to go down to Southern California for his graduation weekend. They have what they called senior weekend. And there was a prom and an opportunity for these kids that didn't know each other because they are all over the country attending the school, but a chance for them to get to know each other, to bond, and then have somewhat of a normal experience of walking the stage and that rite of passage. And so we went through that weekend, and we were on our way home, and my son was driving a car that had his best friend, his girlfriend, and his best friend's girlfriend in it. And I was in the car in front. My sister was driving, and I was a passenger in her car. And so we were on our way home after the weekend. And at some point, I looked behind me, and I noticed that my car wasn't behind us. And so I'm dialing on the phone, and no one's answering. I get no answer. I dialed again and again, and I get no answer. And at some point, we decide to stop and turn around and go back. Well, when we went back, my son's best friend, we saw him on the other side of the freeway. He was covered in blood and he was screaming, trying to stop traffic that was passing by. Well, my son had fallen asleep at the wheel of the car, and the car went off the road and ran into a grove of eucalyptus trees. My son did not survive that accident. And my son's best friend's girlfriend did not survive that accident. Somehow, for some reason, the two of them were not in their seatbelts. And so they didn't survive. The other two, my son's girlfriend and his best friend, both had their seatbelts on, and they survived with some minor injuries, but they survived that weekend. And so I just have felt that if I hadn't been walking with the Lord at the time, I don't think I would have survived that experience. Some people do. I don't believe that I could have. And so I attribute that day, I call it my Azevedo Road experience. I sort of liken it to Paul's Damascus Road experience, right? Where there was this encounter with God, and it changed my life, and it prepared me for the accident, the death of my son, and everything that has happened since then. And one of the things that I did moving through that experience was journaling. I journaled every day, everything that I was experiencing, for that first year, very consistently. And then after that, a little less so. But I've been a journaler, and sort of a sporadic journaler. And that combination of having some place to take my pain, my angst, to be able to cry it out on paper, being angry, being hurt and confused, and not knowing what to do, it's the start of it with the writing. And then I wrote a piece for a magazine. I'm not sure why. A calling. I wrote a piece for a magazine that was about balance, the balance that I learned about life out of pain. And I should have, a smart guest would have pulled that up. I would have pulled that up, and balance was an acronym. I used balance as an acronym for, the 7 things that were going on with me. And how I was learning how to be balanced, and the lessons that I had learned out of pain. But in general, what I walked away from that experience with was that I needed God. I needed to have a relationship. It wasn't any longer enough to have head knowledge, that I had to have heart knowledge, that I had to open myself up, not only to God, but to other people. And I was greatly humbled in that time. I was not someone who turned to other people for help. And I wasn't one who easily accepted the gift that other people had when it came to helping. So if someone offered to help me with something, I would say, yeah, no, I got it. I'm good. I got it. And that time really humbled me.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for sharing that. I already knew a little bit about your story. And again, we share something similar.
Yeah.
And, for the audience listening, we've both lost children. If you haven't listened to my story, and this is the first podcast episode that you're listening to, my husband and I lost a child as well, but our child was 10 and a half months old when she passed, and it was a much, much different story. And I always feel for bereaved mothers. It's just, You know, in my own book, I wrote about it, and I said it's just a club that we all kind of belong to, that nobody ever wanted to enter,
Right,
and
right.
it's still a
You
bond.
know, yeah, yeah, it's weird. I knew at the time, I knew one other person, mother, personally knew one other mother who'd lost a child. That it was an aunt of mine. So it was my cousin who passed. He was grown. He made a choice. He was ill and was having kidney failure and made a choice not to continue with dialysis.
Mm.
And so that was hard, extremely hard, but he made a choice. And so, as hard as it was losing someone that we love, we had to respect that he decided it was a lifestyle that he wasn't interested in living. And that's just the way it went. But yeah, and since then, the other part of the experience is now that I know other mothers who've been through it, that I'm here, right, and can empathize and sympathize in a way I couldn't before, right? And you probably had this, and people in the audience, people will say, "Oh, I can't imagine." Well,
Mhm.
unfortunately, I can imagine, right? And I don't have to imagine. I know what that is, and so like you said, it's not a club any of us wants to be in, but it is one that we are in, and it's possible to get through it with grace, and to not just survive the experience, but to thrive after it
Mhm.
by asking God questions about what is this? What am I supposed to walk away
Mhm.
with, from this with, and how am I supposed to move forward, move through
Mhm.
this? And
Definitely.
he's been faithful in answering those questions for me.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of questions that come with grief.
Yeah.
Before I go on to that, though, I want to bring up something that you said that you were humbled. And, I had my own experience with being humbled in a little bit of a different way. When Isabella was here on Earth, it wasn't that I wouldn't necessarily ask for help. It was that I didn't ask for prayer. So, we
Mm,
read in scripture that says when two or more come together,
yeah.
we pray God can hear us and everything. So when she was sick for the whole time she was here. She had something called trisomy 18, for those of you who, again, don't know. But, I was humbled in the fact that I could actually reach out to everybody I knew. And I mean, everybody I could think of, whether I thought you prayed or not. I just was like, listen, and I wasn't mousy about it. I wasn't like, hey, if you pray. If send good vibes, because you see that sometimes on social media.
Right,
I said,
right.
no, I said
Yeah.
I need prayer.
No,
We need
absolutely.
prayer.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Um,
I love that you did that. I love that you did that. And that's such a good message to send people, right? We didn't have the experience of a protracted, illness. It was sudden. So there wasn't time to ask for that. But I love that you did that. And we should be bold enough to do that, humble enough to ask for prayer. We are supposed to ask for prayer, right? And it's ego. It's ego. It's the world that keeps us from feeling like we can do that. And I'm not shy about asking people to pray for me now, because I still have issues.
Yeah, I'm not shy about it now, and it served me very well now when
Yeah.
things happen, that I don't think twice about it. But I think there's this little thing in the back of your head sometimes, and with a lot of people, at least it was for me, especially with grief, and you get this idea that you're a burden to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
After the first month, I thought, well, nobody wants to hear me mope around here anymore. They've all gone back to their own thing. They don't understand. It's like the difference between
Yeah, that's true.
you kind of yeah, said something to that effect earlier, but it's like the difference between reading a textbook and having textbook knowledge and actually experiencing it,
Yeah.
and so it's a lot different. But a lot of the things that both of us talk about is this idea of moving forward and this idea of being
Yeah.
able to have purpose. And there's so many people out there that whatever is going on in their life has got them in this state where they do not feel like they have a purpose. They don't feel like they can
Right.
move forward. But you're here saying everybody has a purpose and God is good. So can you
Yes.
you
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit? Give us a little bit of encouragement.
Yeah, absolutely. So, after maybe the first year, my son's service was in the church that we had been attending, and I found it difficult to go back to that church because that was the last place I saw him, right in the casket at the front of the sanctuary, and I just couldn't go back. And so I started looking for other churches, and I spent some time just kind of dropping in places. And the really interesting thing was I knew I needed to be around God's people, but I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want people talking to me or asking questions, and I was still sort of going through that. I don't want help. I don't need help. And so if people didn't see me, I didn't have to deal with that. And so it took a little while, but eventually I found a new church, a big church in Sacramento area. It's one of the larger churches. And I thought I could hide there,
Mhm.
right? You've got a massive church. And the interesting thing was God was like, yeah, no, you're not going to be hiding here. And I immediately got plugged in to Celebrate Recovery. And at the time, there wasn't Grief Share. So now Grief Share is available and a place where you can go when you're going through grief. And at the time, it was just Celebrate Recovery. And I felt a little weird going because I didn't have a substance problem. But it's not about substance problems, right? It's about hangups and habits and hurts, hangups, and habits is the thing. And so I was hurting. And so I started going to Celebrate Recovery. I went through the 12 steps there. And again, writing, it helped me to write more. So I continued to writing. Part of the process of the Celebrate Recovery was writing in addition to the journaling I was doing. And, about a year or so into that, I had a change of my job. And I ended up becoming legal counsel for the association that I worked for and joining this group called the Association of Corporate Counsel. And that is where I submitted that article on balance and pain. And because of that column, I was asked to author a regular column. And so that sort of started my writing career, so to speak. And so I wrote for the docket for almost 7 years. And I almost didn't write for them because I felt like, well, what was I going to say? Who wanted to hear what I had to say? And I had a conversation with my sister and my husband, and they both basically said the same thing, which was trust that the words would come. And I did. And it wasn't about trusting that the words would come for the magazine. It was about learning to trust God, period. And so one of the things that I have noticed is that I can make a connection between everything that happens is from God, right? And in I think in the world we say that's a coincidence, or things just work out, or if you're positive, those things will happen for you. And I am learning to trust and understand that trust and obedience are the pathway to the dreams that God has given me, and writing has been one of those. And I didn't always feel like a creative person or an artistic person. I grew up really believing that that was like not a part of my personality. I was analytical, I was logical, and you could, trust on me to be all strategic and, solve problems.
Mhm.
But I have come to realize that, God is creative, right? God is the master artist. And that if I am an image bearer, if I am made in his image, that obviously I have creativity in me as well. And the way it's expressed is different than the way you express yours or my mother or anyone else, but I have that as part of me. And so just learning to trust that was a part of that journey. And so I wrote for the docket for almost 7 years. And I was sad when the time came when I was no longer writing for them. And so I started asking, well, what's next? What's next? And I rolled into 2020. So like leaving 2019, at the end of 2019, there was all this talk about 2020 vision and what are we going to see and what's going to happen. And I was like looking forward to 2020. And it was my word of the year for 2020 was trust. And I said, I'm going to trust God, I'm going to trust myself, and I'm going to trust the process. Meaning, if I listen and do what I know I'm supposed to do, that things are going to work out the way they're supposed to.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things, Christina, that is an absolute, it's going to come out wrong, but benefit of the dark part of my journey is that the rest of this doesn't seem so bad, right? And it may not be the right approach, but I pretty much everything I compare to that period of my life. And I was like, well, in relation to what I've been through,
Mhm.
this isn't that big a deal. And so I approach things in that manner, still sort of analytical, but letting my heart shine through as well. And just reminding myself, I've gotten through hard things. God is with me through everything. He was with me through the hard things. He'll be with me through this.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us have that perspective change. I mean, obviously, you have such a big loss in your life, and things that used to be very important are no longer that important. I remember even being irritated with people who, especially at first. I mean, you grow over the time. Well, most people, I would say, could grow. Not all people do grow through it, but me in particular, I chose to seek the Lord and ask for his peace. And I have seen a lot of growth, from writing as well and different things. But I totally remember being aggravated with other people. Like they were like, oh, I can't get my nails done or I can't get my hair done. And they were like angry. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, really?
If you only knew, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does change your perspective and what is really important in your life. And you really start to evaluate, you make sure that, everybody you care about, you make sure you tell them you love them a lot, as they walk out the
Yes.
door, because it might be the last
Absolutely.
time you get that.
Absolutely. And I think it's made me, in terms of things and ways that I've grown, I'm less judgmental,
Mhm.
right? I am much more willing to forgive and give grace to people because it just, most of the stuff just doesn't matter.
Mhm.
And so, I'm someone who will just, is like, okay, um, pray for them. And I can't change people. I recognize that, you were talking about purpose earlier. My purpose is to prove that God is.
Mhm.
I am not going to prove that God is to anyone by being judgmental of them,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That's not my role. That's between them and God. And
Mhm.
so my job, so to speak, is to love right? We are called to love God with our whole heart, soul, mind, and body, and to love others as we love ourselves. And so that's what I'm here for. That is what I'm here for. And the way that I love is by serving and giving.
Mhm.
And this is one of those opportunities, right? I am serving, I am sharing my story. You're sharing your story. This is how we serve. Um, and the way I give is of my time and my treasures and my talents, right? That's all I have. That's all
Mhm.
I have are the gifts that God has given me, and
Mhm.
they're not for me. And it took some time to understand that, right? That the things that we are given are not solely for us. They're for our family, they are for our extended family, our friends, the community, the world. Our job is to love people. And I can't go around not loving people because they don't choose to live their lives the way I think they should live their lives, or the way I choose to live my life. That's not for me. And so when I came to that, it was like a huge weight off my shoulders, right? It's like I don't carry the burden of other people's choices and their or the consequences. And that, I think, was something that was hard fought for me, because my son's death is a little reflective of some choices that he made that landed him in the situation that he found himself in with the school, and and being in in the situation where he was on this road, to fall asleep. So, and maybe it's not a one-to-one correlation, but in general, the situation was from the consequences of choices. And I have learned to accept that choices, our actions have consequences, and we have to reckon those with God. And it's not my responsibility to hold you accountable,
Mhm.
right, for your choices. That's between you and God.
Mhm. And one of the things I've noticed too over the last several years is that scripture is full of that instruction. I mean, just to guide us and tell us what things are good. And it's not to point a finger, and I've mentioned this several times over the last,
Right.
I don't know, year or so, that it's to really save us from those consequences.
Yes,
We have that instruction book there,
absolutely.
and we have this choice.
Right.
And I was going to tell you that one of my favorite things is and this is, I wish I could claim this, but it's not. I don't even remember who said it, but you say, God, let them see you and me. Maybe be from a song, or
Yes.
is it from a
Yes.
song?
I don't know, but yes, I've heard that or something like that, and very much right. I think someone had said to me once that you may be the only Bible some people ever read, right? Along that same thing, that we are Christ followers, as image bearers. We are the only window into who Christ is that a lot of people are going to see. There are perceptions and misperceptions about what it means to be a Christ follower or a Christian, right? The what gets portrayed often are people who are holier than thou and
Mhm.
very judgmental and mean and angry for whatever their reasons are. But that's not the Christ that I know. That's not the Christ that I follow. And I don't believe that's who I've been called to be. I truly believe that, and it says that this is the commandment, right? It is the great commandment to love God, to love others as you love yourself. And if we did that, I just think about all the problems that would just fall away,
Mhm.
right? That the problems that we have in the world, if we loved God
Mhm.
and we loved our neighbors, we loved others the way we should love ourselves, which is the other part of that, right? Is that I think a lot of us don't love our neighbors because we don't love ourselves.
Yeah.
And we don't love ourselves because we don't love God. We don't know God. We may know of God. We may even quote some scriptures here and there, but we don't really know him. And because if we did, we wouldn't behave the way we do. And the church I was at, Capital Christian, we did a study in 2007 or 2008. And it was, I'm not going to get the name right, but it was about it. The primary question was, if you believed what you say you believed, how would you live your life differently? And that's not the name. It was something project, and it's escaping me at the moment. But I think about that often. If I truly believe what I say I believe, would I do this? Would I do this action? Because what I say I believe is that God is sovereign, right? God is omnipotent. God loves me. God is love. If I believe that, if God is love and God and I are one, I'm in the image of God, that means I'm love. So if I am not loving people, if I'm not loving you, I don't know you, right? We've connected on social media. This is our first time talking sort of in person,
Face to
right?
face.
But I don't really know you. But I like you. I love you. I get warm fuzzies from you. And I've done that with lots of people that I haven't met. Right. And so if I could love people, if you love people, right? If every one of the 7 billion of us loves people, loves our neighbors, loves others, the things that are happening in our world wouldn't be happening. Mass shootings and wars and the violence and yelling at people in the grocery store because they don't have a mask on, or whatever the behaviors are. Those things would go away because love doesn't do that. Love doesn't do that. And we can hold each other accountable in love. I'm not saying that we don't hold each other accountable, but we don't judge them. Right. And so we are called to hold each other accountable in love. And that's one of those things we have to do.
So one of the things that I, wanted to talk or say rather is that scripture is full of places that talk about love, obviously.
Yeah.
And, God says, above all else, love. And there's the love covers a multitude of sins and just tons of different things. And so if we think about that, when we allow our heart to be filled with love instead of anger or hate or any of those things, that allows us to be of service and, be willing to be of service and willing to be giving, and desire to be giving to others. So, and I want to ask you this on your journey. So for me, starting this podcast was not about anything other than, showing people that they weren't alone. But then I also figured out that when I'm of service to others, it helps my guests when they share their stories, and it's continuing to help me heal. Are you noticing that when you are giving and loving and of service,
absolutely,
that it's still
absolutely
to help you?
Absolutely. Because it is on purpose, right? It is living the purpose that I have. So as long as I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing and being obedient, is a better way to say that. As long as I'm being obedient, then I feel like I'm constantly healing and growing. And even, this summer will be 16 years since my son passed. Those days are still excruciatingly difficult. And some days I think about him, I think about the situation, and it's not as painful as other days. So constantly healing, constantly growing, constantly being open to whatever I'm supposed to be feeling. No, ultimately, that's the bottom line is trusting God and what He has for me in this process. So,
Mhm. Well, I think that that is definitely what we all have to do, no matter what we're going through, is learn to trust the Lord, and
yeah.
that piece of obedience is really important as well. So, Whitney, a couple of things, and we're going to close out. First of all, is there any encouragement that you can give to my audience about, just knowing who God is, and this art of loving and service and giving, all that good stuff?
It starts with being willing to open your heart, being willing to and your ears, and being willing to hear God. When I heard God for the first time, at least that I can remember, on Azevedo that day, I don't. I think He was talking to me audibly because I had not been willing to hear Him before, right? And I think that the whole situation with my son, it's like, if you don't humble yourself, I will humble you. And He got my attention. And I think if we will just be willing to be quiet, and we're good at praying, but we're not as good at listening. And I think it starts there. So yes, pray, absolutely pray, but listen. And if we will start to listen, then we can be obedient. And it's a little hard to be obedient when you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. And He's telling us constantly, right, through other people, through His word, His will, His word, and He's got a way that He wants us to be. And we need to be open to that. And once we've done that, I think He just makes it, it's all possible. He's all about possibilities. And, but we need to be in touch with what He's saying, that He wants from us and where He wants us to go. So, every morning, I've got a couple of questions that I ask, and then I listen for answers. And it has made a huge difference in my life. And it's like, what is it that you're asking of me today? Right? How can I show love today? How can I love people today? And if there's something specific that He wants, and I don't know that it's necessarily, it's not necessarily, that's not for Him, that's for me, right? That's the reminder to me to be in touch with. And then I say, help me to want what you want me to want. And so those are some of the things that I say, and I write those out every single morning so that as I move through my day, that's part of the dialogue that's in my head. And it just helps me to stay focused on people, not in a martyred way, not in people are draining me, but in terms of love and giving and serving. And that's my focus. And as long as I do that, I know that what I'm doing, I'm on the right track, and there are blessings in that.
I love that. So Whitney, will you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah, so the best place to reach me is on LinkedIn. It is a place that I play. I'm and other social, but LinkedIn is a great place. I've got all the things that I'm doing there, working through the things that I'm writing, and the places that I'm speaking are always posted there.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And you can also listen to Whitney when she speaks in the next Kingdom Women Summit, bearing fruit in April. It will be April 14th in Kingdom Business. So I'm excited to have her as a speaker there as well. For all of you listening, continue to be blessed and bless others, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much, Whitney. And I want to thank you for joining us on Faith Breathed Hope, where you gain inspiration and motivation to renew hope and discover purpose in any circumstance. Please like and share this podcast and give us a review on iTunes. Be blessed.